I'd like to share with you a quote that I found recently. Perfection is a man-made concept. Nature is irregular. Well, both you and I know that perfection can never be reached, but we hold it out in a way that it's kind of a reminder that we are not worthy because we cannot reach this perfection. And we hold nature to these same standards. I think that quote very much represents what you will see in this coming video, the session that we held on our series. It's all about nature. It's in our nature. And I felt that this session, after watching it a couple times, I felt it was like good wine that gets better every single time. The focus on those irregularities that not only what nature has, but what we have as individuals was very strong throughout the entire session. And it left a very deep impression on me. And I hope that you are able to come up with some additional value from it as well. So let's get started.
I suppose when I was growing up in California, the first of the long drought started in 1986 and it went on until the 90s. I grew up in a farming family, in a farming community, and nature was seen as a commodity. Water especially was seen as a commodity, and it was used as such. It wasn't appreciated. But then the drought came, we started to go into, and this is affecting a 6-year-old child as well as various other people, but I can only talk about how it affected me. We went from having a very, a good livelihood to suddenly explaining to a child that you could only take 1 3-minute shower a week, that for an entire family, they couldn't actually flush the toilet. These are the kind of microcosms that a child goes with. And 40 years on now, this seems to be still a narrative that's happening. So what is our actual personal response when our relationship with nature is so fractured that we can actually appreciate it now, but it's still seen by so many people as a commodity across the world?
Maybe I can pick it up from here. I have learned recently that there exists a term for this. It's called climate anxiety. And I think it's something that needs to be taken serious. And I think I actually learned that from someone in the regenerative movement, from, what's her name? Macy.
Joanna Macy?
Yeah. Yeah, she just pointed to the finger to it, and she's like, yeah, we all hurt because we are realizing the fracture that is happening, or the schism that is happening in nature, the extinction of species. Anyone belonging to nature and not totally numb would feel that. And I didn't think about that until that book. So that book was Coming Back to Life, I think it's called. That was a powerful book for me, because before that I just used that German word Weltschmerz, which is a really good word. Kind of the hurt from the world or something like that. I think it's real, and I think we should be honest with that. I thought it was very well put in that movie, in the Netflix movie Don't Look Up. We're just all medicating ourselves. I'm not talking about just drugs, but just watching mindless series all day and watching screens all day, because we're actually feeling this hurt, but nobody is honest with themselves. Maybe I'll leave it there.
I think a lot of the younger generations are dealing with this climate anxiety, and we obviously have to appreciate the activists that have brought, people like Greta Thunberg, for example, that have brought the sense of urgency to it. But there is the reverse of that coin that you just mentioned, Mikhail, which is just the amount of anxiety and hurt that it can cause. I think,
and apathy, when it's just like
true.
When people are not able to look at it anymore. Yeah,
you feel completely powerless. And I think one I think that pill should probably recognizing the hurt and acknowledging it should also be, and that's why I like these conversations with that Mike is organizing as well, about showing also that if you look at screens every day, and I'm pointing my finger at the news, that is also not the reality of the world, that there are a lot of good projects, and there's a lot of people on this call that I bet involved in them on circular economy and everything. And I think that's also something that should be emphasized, just how much good is happening and how much effort people are putting into saving the planet and changing our relationship with it. I think that's very important.
If I can just add really quickly, and then I'll shut up for a few minutes. Just really quickly. I start a lot of classes in the design context because I'm trying to give the students this sense of agency and urgency, because I think designers are literally, well, I mean, I don't think, it's not an opinion. Designers are literally making the future. And so there's a lot of responsibility. And what I don't tolerate is this sort of, no one had to buy this thing that I produced. No, I don't. But anyways, what I always start class with, or often start class with, is I say I watch a lot of science fiction movies. And it's true, I like science fiction movies. Kind of geeky about that. And I've not seen a single one where the future is good. But here's the interesting thing, and I think this is almost cognitive dissonance. So our stories about the future are shit. We're very pessimistic as the human species. But at the same time, we can't wait to get into the future. We're super technophile. Everyone knows what the weather is like tomorrow, right? Everyone is already leaning into the future. But at the same time, we think the future is going to be awful. So that's a weird state of mind.
That's an interesting point, but I do want to point out that it has not always been like that when it comes to science fiction. It's actually very much of the moment. We have a lot of fear about the future, therefore our science fiction is very fearful. During, for example, the Cold War, the science fiction was also super fearful.
Good point.
And also very focused on like nuclear destruction because it was the Cold War. But at other times in human history, science fiction has been extremely hopeful, but that's because our experience of what we thought the future was going to look like was very hopeful. But I think it is very indicative. I think it is very indicative of the general psyche of what we think about the future. When we look at things like movies or fiction, things like that. How do we perceive the future? It is pretty dark because that's what people tend to think. Unfortunately, that's the future predictions are not very hopeful about the future. One thing I did want.
Sorry, Jen. No, I was just going to say that there was actually a study done recently about horror films. Not that I watch horror films because I'm a big scaredy cat, but it's it's exactly the same as for sci-fi. Horror films are a reflection of what our current state, fear is. Yeah, and you can actually map it historically. So it's very much worth paying attention to that. So I don't know why we're always at doom and gloom, except is there somebody in sci-fi who always saves the day, and that gives us a little bit of hope? I do think it's very much a cognitive dissonance, as Michal said. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's easier for us to imagine a dystopia than a utopia, right? So imagining a utopia is opting out of the default. So this is the weird thing. So the tragic thing, or banality of evil, even. I mean, none of us wakes up in the morning. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Yes, today I'm gonna really screw up the planet." But we all do together. It's a gigantic tragedy of the commons. But here's the thing that's disturbing to me. The default in today's life is to live an unethical and an unsustainable life. You have to opt out of that status quo. You have to go out of your way to be zero waste, to be vegan, to be whatever. It's cumbersome. It's complex, and I respect everyone who tries to live such a life. But default is unethical and unsustainable. That's what is made easiest. So a lot of good people living under the wrong intent, or what's the word I'm looking for? The wrong story, really.
Can I throw in a general question to all of you? It was very apparent that we were talking about fear, and this is another one of those huge subjects that we do, is the elephant in the room. How do you all deal with the subject? I'd be really curious.
Wow. It's like a self goal. Now I gotta talk about this.
You open up the Pandora's box, Michelle.
Yeah.
I'll just start because I opened that box. I did. I have to admit, I wear different hats, right? I'm a father of two girls, teenagers, 15 and 13. So that's one role. I'm constantly confronted with the Gen Zs, the mid-20-year-old students. I teach a lot. And then I have relationships like today, right? So in general, I have to admit it is hard to stay positive. I have to work on it, right? There are different techniques that work for me to stay at least neutral, to stay at least neutral. But I do have to say one thing. I sometimes feel hypocritical in front of my students, because I'm telling them, hey, let's do this, let's roll up our sleeves, we're designers, circular economy, but I don't actually feel it. I have to be brutally honest with myself right now. I don't actually feel it. I actually it can get very dark and get very pessimistic. Absolutely.
And
Sorry,
I would
go ahead.
sorry, Michael, I was just going to say, I'd agree, especially when you get to a certain age, you just look at the baton that you're passing and you're trying to think to be positive and optimistic all the time. And there's a logical part of you, and I'm quite a linear, very logical person. There's a logical part of you going, I don't actually see a way out, and that can be very overwhelming, no matter what we're trying to do. So I break it down myself to a granular level. And I'd say, how can I help people help themselves, rather than how can I change the overall system structures? And as a consultant, that's what you do, and as a volunteer, that's what you do, and an academic, that's what you do, is actually break it down to what are the needs in front of you right there. Because you may not be able to affect systematic change, and you can be banging your head against the wall, and that will destroy you.
Yep.
Depending on your personality type.
No, you're totally right. You're
Yeah.
totally right on that one.
And so that coping with this, for me, the easiest way, and I know that this is coming from a position of privilege, and not everyone around the world can do this, but the best way to cope with it is change my surroundings in a way that I surround myself. So I stopped watching the news. I'll just be honest. I avoid them like the plague, watch as little as possible, and surround myself with the people that are doing the work constantly. I have been fortunate to work in this happy bubble of people that work in systems change, regeneration, permaculture. So it's easier to stay motivated if you are surrounded by these people all the time, because everyone is trying together. I think and sometimes I think in these groups that I'm a part of, people sometimes get frustrated around the lack of collective action, but they keep coming back, because even if they were initially wondering if they would join into some big action by getting together, and that doesn't happen, they just still keep coming back just to be in each other's company, even if each one is making smaller actions and trying to kickstart smaller projects that are different in different parts of the world. They still keep coming together because they motivate each other and keep each other up. So I think the surroundings are very important.
I think this started taking place at the end of last year. I used presence as my benchmark, and just to make sure that it's clear that we're all on the same page, and this is my definition of presence, that I do not let those events that took place yesterday or the day before influence me today, because that's something that happened yesterday that has nothing to do with today. on that same token, anything that is to happen tomorrow, what am I going to do today to influence what's going to happen tomorrow? I might have an influence, but maybe not. And in essence, why am I spending so much time on things that have nothing to do with the here and now? And so for me, it became very, very clear that the only way that that for me personally, that I can get past all of this stuff that we're talking about is toss yesterday and don't think about tomorrow, and how do we make the most out of today? And it's been a very interesting journey, especially considering that I realized that this is truly Pandora's box. Opening up this one is Pandora's box. I held a live stream at the beginning of the year with someone I was working with, and I just to get some ideas of how to approach it and raising perhaps some questions that people would have. I posed a very simple question, and I asked people, what is the biggest deterrent for you to get past living in the here and now? And I lie you not, that everybody, almost everybody, came up with things with external forces, things that we cannot control, that were influenced, that were saying they are getting in the way of me living in the here and now. And I'm going to take a page out of Carolina's book. I'm going to take a page out of her book and say, well, just turn off the TV channel. Just turn it off. Just turn it off. Just pretend it doesn't exist, because you cannot influence it. It doesn't. If it has an influence on you, it's probably in some perverted form. So it brings no real added value. So just cross it off your list. And I'm saying something that's easier said than done. And I believe this is all a process. But I do see a clear correlation between this idea of fear that has been used as an instrument to keep us docile. I would say that fear is a tool that is used to keep us docile. And so either we allow, if we feel that we're empowered, either we allow for that tool to influence the effect on the here and now, or we don't. That's a power that we have, and we do have a choice. And I don't care whether we're privileged or not, we have a choice to follow it. And I'm from the school of Viktor Frankl, who truly was he was the practitioner of living in the here and now. Any thoughts on that?
I think we've seen a rise also in popularity in the practices of mindfulness lately. There's a lot of people turning to them, and I think this is one of the reasons, because a lot of this anxiety, this is the way this conversation started, coming from looking at the future, etc. Just learning to be in the here and now is also an antidote to all of this anxiety, and all of the overthinking, because we all here know, I think it's a common to human experience, that we always imagine things worse than they might be, and put ourselves through unnecessary stress. So I think all this anxiety created by climate has created a lot of openness in people to these ideas of mindfulness that keep you here and now. Because if you're also in a state of fear of what's happening in the future, you lose your agency and you cannot take action.
Very true. Who wants to go first? There's so much to unpack here. That was a real, what's it called? Pandora's box.
Yeah.
One thing that a term that I'd like to play with is, well, mindfulness has increased in popularity. Absolutely. I find that especially social media is quite the opposite. It's full-mindedness. It's how to stuff ourselves to the brim and not concentrate on the here and now, to keep ourselves medicated at all points. And so when I see, I'm not on Instagram, but when I hear about Instagram influencers talking about yoga and meditation, that's an oxymoron. I'm sorry, right? The Instagram is the opposite of what we are probably all agreeing on. But I do have to admit, what happens to me sometimes, as you're seeing right here in this moment, I'm saddened. I'm saddened by the state of distraction. Like everyone is, like people are not having this conversation, on a whole. And so I'm a huge fan of what you're doing here, Michael. And I call this long form. It's like a town hall meeting. It's long form. It's not short form. It's not a tweet, you know? And I think this is where the magic takes place. In terms of mindfulness, I personally, I do have a meditation practice, and it is what, it's not to get happier, but it's to keep me stable.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people misunderstand that. A lot of people think you sit down on the cushion every day in order to improve. I'm doing it so I don't sink, you know? And I'm just gonna borrow real quick one thing that Sam Harris has taught me. I'm a huge fan of his podcasts, and he actually has an application, a mindfulness application called Waking Up. He says in there that being stuck and entertained by thoughts is literally a hallucination. And that's what Michael was saying. Thoughts are by definition either positive or negative, and either about the past or the future. Those are the four spaces we find ourselves in. And so the present moment is rare. And so this waking up idea is interesting. It's sort of like when you wake up out of a dream, you realize, wait a second, that was a powerful narrative, powerful story, but this is the real one. Same with daydreaming. You're stuck in this thing, but you're not actually here, and all of a sudden you realize, and it's like a sobering up from a hallucination. So while I agree totally with you, Michael, I think that the point is to start accepting that emotions and feelings and thoughts are transient and they pass, and to not get wound up by them. But I think we're saying the same thing.
What I would say about that actually is just something that comes to me. I work with a lot of farmers, both as a volunteer in associations, and as they're my clients. They have a very high suicide rate in Ireland. They're the highest. They're one of the industries that is the most difficult for them to go into here and now, because they're always thinking about what's going to happen next year, what's going to happen next season, when do we need to plant this, when do we need to do this, and it's a major industry within Ireland as well as in the States. This is one of the things I'd say is actually providing support for mental health services is one of the major climate actions that we can provide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they get stuck into this feedback loop, and you can't get them out of it without a lot of work and a lot of support and a lot of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're actually trying to work to, and maybe that's something we haven't been focusing on. We've been focusing on here maybe on crisis, rather than how do we actually build resilient mental health in certain industries, in certain sections.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's just, I want to applaud to that also, because that's just not
Yeah.
mentioned much. Everyone's talking about erratic weather or species extinction, etc. No one's talking about this mental health crisis that we are having as a species. Absolutely.
Yeah, and even just to give you an example, in I think it was 2016 or 2017, the farmers couldn't get out into the fields because it was so wet. So the weather's changed in Ireland, much damper springs, and they couldn't actually get out to do the sowing. And they were calling me and apologizing that they wouldn't be able to provide me with the products I needed to buy. And I actually was calling into them to make sure that they had somebody to talk to. I didn't care. I needed to make sure they were okay.
Okay.
So it's something that we really need to think about when we're looking at all of our different tool sets to help people manage through climate change and be proactive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what I heard from you, Rebecca, is that this idea, especially for the farmers, that they feel so alienated, and that those things that are coming their way, they feel helpless, and so they are left to their own resources, which is the antithesis of having a community, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So whether they're seeing from the media, and Carolina was right, and about turning off the news, but what they're seeing from the media is they're being attacked because of greenhouse gas emissions or whatever. What they're seeing from the weather is they're being attacked in that what has always worked for them before doesn't work anymore, and they can't actually deliver. And this is their life. They've done this for this is their entire identity, and it's just breaking down around them. And that's only one industry. We could probably talk about fisheries and that kind of thing, what is happening with them. That's just my own experience. So
Jennifer, please.
We're so far into another conversation than I thought we were having.
It's your fault, Michael.
Is that bad?
I'm also not sure I fully agree. I think that I certainly think that blaming social media and over medicating ourselves in distraction is true for a lot of places on Earth and a lot of people on Earth. But I also think it's a little bit of the argument is a little bit of a distraction from the idea of be here now, the idea of mindfulness, the idea of being in a moment. Well, what if your moment is really shitty? To what Rebecca was saying, what if your be here now is not a place you really want to be?
Yeah.
It's only a nice thing to do if you have a roof over your head and you have food and water and you're generally well paid and you have healthcare. But I think the idea of I think the quote unquote global distraction problem, I think is partly because not partly. I think a lot of it
is
also
a first world problem.
Yeah, these structural reasons that we try to distract. I'm not part of that because I am privileged. That people try to distract themselves from their daily life because the daily life is so crappy. And it's so crappy because of all the structural reasons why it is so crappy, not because anybody's individual life is crappy. So I think it's certainly the climate anxiety, I think it's obviously a very different experience depending on where you sit in it. And I have the privilege of knowing that regardless of what happens with the climate crisis and how much or how little we avert the climate disaster or any of the other planetary boundary disasters, because climate is only one of them. I live in a specific area geographically, and I sit in a specific socioeconomic status in a particular country in the world. I personally will likely be fine. And I know that, so I can sit here comfortably knowing that. So I experience climate anxiety very, very differently than somebody for example, today in Florida is experiencing a hurricane, or in other areas of the world that are sinking underwater or experiencing major droughts, or their climate anxiety, to Rebecca's point, the farmer's anxiety is a much different anxiety than my anxiety. Absolutely. And therefore the way of dealing with the fear and working through it and what's the contribution of you to the world is going to be different depending on how you sit.
Very well said, Jennifer.
Very well said. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And it's part of the distraction itself. We get caught up in this thing, oh, poor me, I'm thinking so much about climate change, when actually climate change is not affecting my day. No. Let's be honest here. Yeah, it was a little hot this summer, but you know what I mean? But I can, put on air conditioner or do something unsustainable like that, right? Other people can't even do that. So absolutely. Absolutely. But maybe I'm playing devil's advocacy a little bit, but I find it especially frustrating, I guess, with my audience, if you want to call it that, my students in the design schools, because they do have privilege. They do have they were supported by their parents and by their society to go to university and study the art of design. And I find a lot of apathy. I talk to thousands of students, and just a few of them will do something like universal design for the handicapped, disenfranchised people, or something to do with commoning, or something to do with the circular economy. The rest will, like Victor Papanek said, they will produce stuff that nobody needs to impress people that you don't know with money you don't have. You know, and I'm like, what a waste of human capital. And it just gets me frustrated. So me personally, just to get back to your personal question, Michael, me personally, I get super frustrated. When I'm frustrated, I get cynical, and cynicism doesn't help anyone. So in a way, sometimes I make things even worse because they walk out feeling darker than when they walked into my class. So that's kind of the tightrope walk, I guess, you know, for me personally.
Well, I think that's an interesting point also, because if people who were experiencing climate disasters more personally were in your design class and designing the solutions, they would obviously be coming in with different answers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some
unfortunately-
of the best designers are in the underdeveloped world. There's a principle called Jugaad, you know, frugal innovation, because it's the mother of invention. Absolutely. Absolutely. These kids that I have, I guess they're not hungry enough. That sounds very politically incorrect, but I will leave it there. I meant it metaphorically.
Yes.
Yeah, where do we go from here? So one thing that I find very interesting in terms of this general conversation we're having is inside of behavioral psychology, the acceptance and commitment therapy ACT. I find that very interesting because it's based on a kind of mindfulness, even if we don't want to call it that, to accept, like Jennifer was saying, to accept, okay, right now I'm having a shitty day. So it's not positive psychology that I'm talking about here, because there's a bunch of them out there that are like, just think positive thought. Well, okay, how do you do that? Right? So acceptance and commitment therapy is interesting because they accept what there is, positive emotions as well as negative emotions. And only then can you make a commitment to steer yourself more in one direction or the other direction.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
There must be a leverage point where you actually go, okay, I've accepted, I'm committed to look at it more positively. And then there must be a point where a human being, like we're seeing in Iran, actually has to go, I'm not putting up with this anymore. What is that leverage? What is that point? You know?
I'm not. I didn't fully understand.
So what I'm saying is, we can be conditioned, or we can condition ourselves to say, look, we're in a bad situation. Hopefully things will get better. We're committed to thinking of things in a more positive light. But there is a point where every human being has a survival instinct to kick in and
Right.
actually say, we're not putting up with this anymore. We
Right.
need to change. And how
Right.
how does that, I don't want to go around triggering people to change, to, you know, rise up or anything like that, but how do we actually motivate people to say, no, we're not just going to accept
No,
the
no, no.
status quo? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's what Jennifer
Yeah.
meant when you made that comment. There is absolutely a point where it's beyond passiveness, and you stand up for your rights and you go to the streets. Absolutely, but that's the commitment part, right?
Okay.
So the idea is it's kind of evolutionary. So
Okay.
the inside world, we have this stuff bubbling up, and it's positive and negative emotions and feelings and thoughts. And it's behavior by consequence. So you can start seeing, okay, this stuff brings me towards my goal. And this, for example, like Carolina said, to surround yourself with people that do similar things. In your case, to turn off the news or whatever. When you start realizing, okay, this is not healthy for me, you stop partaking in that kind of behavior, and the other stuff you favor. And so you are actually making a natural selection of your inner world. That's the idea of behaviorism, basically, applied
Yeah.
to yourself.
Yeah, apologies. I just didn't understand when you first described it. I wanted to make sure that I was getting a full understanding of the
No, totally.
the process. Yeah.
And I think there's a point where yeah, you need to stand up for your rights. Absolutely. You can't just sit on your cushion and mull this stuff over. Absolutely not. Yeah.
Jennifer, you made a claim. Sorry, if I could quickly interject. Jennifer, you made a claim that you were looking for the conversation to take a different path. That's what your expectations were. Perhaps if you could allude to what your expectations were.
I may have been too literal on this potentially when you described it. When Rebecca
That's
started,
important.
yeah, when Rebecca kind of led us off and from the description, I thought we were going to be talking more about conceptions of nature and relationship to nature and cultural expectations around nature and how it relates to perhaps our destruction of such nature through climate disaster.
Can I try to segue it to there, because I'm with you, Jennifer. That's what I thought this would, and I actually think we're inside of that discussion right now. But let me try to segue it over there, kind of nudge it over there. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Alan Watts, and he way back in the 60s, he said something like, we're not born into the world. If anything, we're born out of the world. And that sounds kind of hippy dippy, I guess. But when you look at it literally, it's pretty stupid to say you're born into the world. That's like an alien getting dropped into the world, right? That's not, we're definitely part of the system coming out. And the destruction that is happening is this belief that we're outside of nature. That's exactly what is happening. And so this numbing and concentrating on yourself, which is an illusion. There's no subject object. You are part of the entire thing. Every creed and religion says that. There's no subject object. There's no me and them, us and them, I and you. Actually, right? And so I think a lot of what is happening is because of that mistake that we're making, that epistemological mistake that we're making.
Actually, I think a lot of religions in particular don't say that. Some major ones do, obviously, but I think a lot of major
like
religions.
Christianity, you mean?
Yes.
Thou shalt
Yes.
dominate the world.
Right.
You mean that one?
Yeah, exactly that one, of which my American cultural tradition is from.
Yeah.
I think that's an important point, actually.
But Jesus Christ did say, "Know thyself."
He
And
did.
he did say, "As is above is below," and all kinds of stuff like that.
Right.
The problem is written by a whole bunch of authors. It didn't fall from the sky.
Mm-hmm.
But I would be pretty sure if we had one of the Old Testament prophets in this conversation right now, I don't think that would be against our opinion. I don't know. That was a bit of a gamble.
I have one waiting. I have one waiting off stage. Should I invite him in?
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting, though, because, I mean, if you take the three Abrahamic traditions, for example, if you take the Torah, the Quran, or the Christian Bible, all of them in various ways, all of them contradict themselves as well, to be clear. But the general sentiment of them all is that the world was given to humans. Go divide and multiply.
No, you're right. You are right.
And not that, and there's a lot in there about the responsibility of people to take care of the planet. There's actually a very large amount written in the Torah, for example, about taking care of the planet. But it's taking care of this thing we were given that's for us to do what we want with it. That's the general sentiment. Versus a tradition or religion that sees us, like you said, that sees us as actually part of it, as just another animal that lives within the ecosystem. And I do think it's pretty significant that, using my own country as an example, the American tradition born out of Christianity, this ethos and the sentiment, America is very large. I'm talking mostly urban and suburban culture of this world, and the nature is outside of my life, and I go visit it. Maybe I go hike in it, maybe I go kayak in it, and it is somewhere I go to, probably in a car, and then I come back to my house.
No, it's good.
These posters behind me from a state park, because the state park is protected. It's over there. It's not around me. I have a small yard. I don't see that as nature, right? That's like not nature in my head.
Yeah.
In my head, nature is over here somewhere else. And I do think that our collective and how we treat nature has to do with, because we treat nature as a separate thing and not part of our lives.
But that's what I was saying. I guess that sentence of most religions agree on this wasn't totally correct. I give you that. But during the pandemic, I thought about this a lot. During the pandemic, think about this for a second. When you say, I have a cough, my cough, how stupid is that? Because it's actually your cough as well. That's the entire point of a pandemic. A disease is not an individual phenomenon; it's a population phenomenon. But right. So the reason this pandemic took so long is because
I think the virus is non-binary, by the way.
it's not. Diseases are population phenomena.
Yeah.
And so it's just, let me just finish this one sentence really quickly. So you can't really, in nature, you can't really do these kinds of separations, like my disease, your disease. Same with a tree. Like if I have a tree in my garden, is that really my tree? Because the roots go underneath my fence into the neighbor, and the tree's producing oxygen that affects everyone. How can we actually make this distinction between private property and the commons? That's what this conversation, I think, boils down to. What is human nature? What is my part of that? What is your part of that?
Rebecca, please.
Yeah, no, Jennifer, I was just going to say something similar happened. So Ireland was quite repressed in financial matters for a very long time.
By the way, when I drink from this is not alcohol. This is just a flat water bottle, okay? Flat water bottle.
So there was a Celtic Tiger boom that started around 2001, and people suddenly had money to spend, and it all became about consumerism. So nature was just not considered. Things were torn up for Sitka spruce plantations because that's the way of making money. There's no biodiversity there. Farmlands increased because there was more money coming into that. People weren't going out of the cities. If they were going in their giant BMW SUVs. And then the economy collapsed in 2007, 2008. Right. And from there, we've actually seen a good amount of grassroots organizations to start to try and reclaim. But it's just to break that link between having enough money to I suppose, to have a certain standard of living, and this sudden disregard. And I don't know what the thought process is. This sudden disregard for nature as being the other, as you were describing. It's a weird dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, they're talking about the basis of regeneration, aren't they?
Yes, in a way, and everyone was just making me think that there's been a mention. I think a lot of people are interested at this point also in indigenous wisdom and indigenous stories, because they are completely different worldviews that consider humans as very much a part of nature, far more separate, and if anything, with a responsibility towards being a part of it in a regenerative way, that there is no destruction, and being if anything stewards. I don't want to get into it too much because I don't think I have the kind of knowledge to speak for it, but I think the some of the fundamental differences in this is making a lot of people turn into and wanting to learn more about these types of indigenous wisdom. And I think it's very important that that the role in the protection of nature of indigenous peoples is recognized, because most of the biodiversity on the planet is held in locations that are stewarded by indigenous people. And sometimes even in our conversations around around conservation, about protecting nature, we end up being maybe judgmental in a way, or this should be done and that should be done, and there's maybe we should be listening to the people that are stewarding these locations. What do we actually know about it? Do they actually have a voice at the table? And maybe then if these voices are brought to the table, maybe then it will be easier for us to learn from them a little bit about these worldviews that consider nature as something that have a view of nature that we might have lost. And I do believe that maybe if we go far enough back anywhere in the world, that there would have been a different relationship with nature. It's just different places lost it at different times. And
that's kind of what I meant earlier with that sentence about the traditions believing in this, and it got perverted along the way. Absolutely.
Carolina, you make a great point, and a lot of what I'm saying, and I am absolutely no expert in this, is that we need to allow Indigenous women, especially, to step up to the table and give them a voice, because they seem to be the shepherds in a lot of different cases.
There's a type of feminism called ecofeminism that I think makes very good sense, because it's kind of weird that gods are masculine, because I've never seen anything alive come out of a male animal.
Well, we do have Mother Earth.
It should be goddesses. I mean, it's completely ridiculous to believe in male gods, male creators. It's just insane. But so ecofeminism, to call nature female, Gaia, for example, or Mother Nature, I think makes a good deal of sense. And biologically speaking, with us humans, women are far better about or with communal things, and it is the male principle that is you and I, us and them, conquest, etc. I'm exaggerating, obviously.
No, you're not.
There are phenotypical differences, and behavior is part of the phenotype. Then women would be far better politicians. Yeah.
I don't think you're going to get any argumentation with this group.
No, I guess not. No.
But how?
Brown nosing.
But no. But the question is getting back. I'd like to kind of pick up on some of the thoughts that I heard about, especially this idea of looking at the practices. I'm going to use the phrase practices that are perhaps from the past that did not come out of anywhere. And to what degree can we use that knowledge that is still out there, almost extinct, but just the same, to use that as a way to get closer to those things where we need to be? And I think there's a common agreement here that one of the biggest problems, piggybacking on a lot of things I heard right here, is that our estrangement from nature is truly the cause of the problem. So to bring this in a more solution-based perspective, how can we go ahead and take that of what's already out there and use it as a way for something that we can consider to be the common good?
Yeah.
Your question reminds me of solutions, like nature-based solutions that, like natural capital, for example, and ways of quantifying biological processes. I'm always very skeptical of them, or bioengineering generally. Not because I'm a Luddite, but because I get nervous when we talk about what is the natural capital of an area? What kind of, what's the term for it? Like earth resources, like how much.
Yeah. How do you measure the worth of
Yeah.
a hectare of land or something, right?
And ecosystem services and this type of
Ecosystem
thing.
services. Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. Ecosystem services. So I love in part of me says, well, that was a really fancy twist of the tongue. Way to make sure that we consider nature and conserve an area because it has ecosystem services. Like if we can quantify a city's parks as ecosystem services for wastewater management, great, we're probably more likely to keep the parks. On the other side, it's still another way of viewing nature as a service to us and not having inherent value just on its own. Like when we talk about, there's much research out there now and many conversations about what a catastrophe biodiversity loss is. And I've noticed a shift in the conversation away from biodiversity loss is a problem because we're losing biodiversity and more towards biodiversity loss is a problem because we will lose access to medicine. We're going to lose access to carbon capture. We're going to lose like all these things that we care about. And so the pragmatist in me says, well done, humans, or whoever is coming up with these ideas that makes it seem like a good idea for humans to care. Like that was.
You have a little bit of cynicism also.
I am I'm an elder millennial. An elder millennial meaning I am a pragmatic optimist. I'm from the yes we can generation, so I'm definitely still an optimist, but I'm a pragmatic optimist because I wouldn't be a millennial unless I was.
No, plus I meant it as a compliment. It's like I think that's kind of funny. Like, well done, humans. Good job.
So your question, Michael, makes me think of that, and I hold that tension. So part of me says it's a really good idea to think about things this way because the pragmatist in me says we're in a speeding car going off a cliff. Whatever we can do to slow down the car is a good idea. And then the other side of me says, but the way we view the problem is fundamentally wrong, and if the way you ask a question means you get different answers, so we need to fundamentally change the way we view the problem. And I hold those two things in tension.
Yeah, I have to interject here because I think this is something that we run across quite often, and this idea of dualism, that it's an either or. And I question, why does it have to be either or? That is actually very unnatural. That is very human. That's very logical. And it's ends up becoming very deterministic.
Maybe I can take that one on. When I tell people that I'm an anthropologist, I always get huge questions, especially in bars. In bars, everyone is a philosopher. You notice that? In bars, everyone knows the answer to everything. And so when I'm in a bar and I'm telling someone I'm an anthropologist, they ask me things like, so are humans good or evil? Like, is human nature good or evil? And then I give them this annoying answer, which is, it depends. That's a super annoying answer. But here's what in general, like, it depends. This is freaking annoying. I just ask you, depends on what, right? And so I would tell them that it depends on the situation. And here's what I mean. And this is where I think we can sort of resolve some of this tension. So behavior is contextual. Like behavior doesn't even make sense in a vacuum. Like, what are you going to interact with, right? Behavior is always contextual. So us humans, we behave in situation X, we behave with an appropriate algorithm, let's say, or code or program. Okay. And in situation Y, we behave differently. It's called adaptation. So if you don't like behavior X, then don't freaking design situation X. Design situation Y. That's the basics of behavior change. And so that was kind of put in design thinking language, right? And on purpose, because I think they're the doers. And so if you don't like human behavior X, like let's say aggression, then don't design our schooling system or whatever in a way that aggression has to come out. That's, I know it's pretty vague, but if you want sustainability to come out of humans, you need to set a context that where that virtue comes out.
Well, people can only do this because my background is in health behavior. People can only do the behaviors that are available to them from the menu of behaviors that are available to them. And if you want to change behavior, you need to make the right behavior the easy behavior, or preferably
Absolutely.
the only
Absolutely.
behavior. Right now,
The default. Yeah.
the default behavior needs to be the easier solution. Right now, you gave the example earlier of being waste free. Right now, the easiest thing for me to do is to throw something in a trash can. I live in an area where trash is taken from the curb away somewhere else where I don't see it, and then it's
Away.
gone.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the easiest thing to do. Unfortunately, we've created systems and structures where it is impossible for a individual to live a quote unquote sustainable lifestyle and to live in line with planetary boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is why personally I think a lot of individual based solutions are not going to cut it, because we have a global systemic problem and we are relying on individuals changing their behavior to fix it, and that's never going to work. We need the much larger entities like governments and corporations to change their
Absolutely.
so that the
I think
menu
design should be part of public policy. I don't
Mhm.
know why they're in the art schools. They should be part of public policy and political science.
So Jennifer, I would just say actually, when I moved to Ireland, I'm not I'm not bashing Ireland. It's my home country now. When I moved here 20 years ago, there was no recycling, absolutely no recycling. Everything just went to landfill or incineration, and up until I think last year, you couldn't recycle soft plastics. So that's a major thing, because the governments wouldn't actually invest in the infrastructure to do it. So yes, you can tell people until you're blue in the face, you need to be doing this, that, or whatever. But if the system isn't there, it's not going to happen. Of course not.
Well, I think that's what Jennifer is saying. Judging from how you introduced yourself, Jennifer, you work in the circular economy. Recycling is pathetic. You can only downcycle in the way the system is set up. So
yes, but if there's
producing
no
compounds
recycling,
that we
that's
can't separate.
But like I said, if there's no recycling and everything's going to landfill and incineration, that's worse. You know, you're moving to circular economy, and like I said, I wrote a white paper on that. You have to actually start taking baby steps. If there's nothing,
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But it's symptomatic that we're making these complex compounds, technological materials, and then we're asking the citizens to put it into one of four colors, please. I mean, you know what I mean? That's why I work in design schools, because the things have to be produced entirely different before we think about recycling.
I do actually disagree with the idea, though, of taking baby steps. I think that the time for baby steps when we're talking about nature was probably 50 years ago. I actually think there is harm, and I think that in some times there is a place for baby steps, but I do actually think that sometimes baby steps do more harm than good, because they give the illusion of change when there is actually no change. I mean, to quote who I think, Carolina, you brought up Greta Thunberg earlier in the conversation, to quote, I think, Greta Thunberg, I want you to act like the house is on fire, because it is.
Mm-hmm.
That we need much bigger, much more systemic, much more immediate, change the entire system solutions. And I do think things like recycling or carbon capture or some solutions that make us feel like we are gradually getting there actually can set us back by wasting time.
Yeah,
and we
and
don't really
no, I would absolutely agree with you, but I suppose and we brought up design thinking earlier, is you actually had to put the person to a certain extent in the center of it, and here we have a massive problem with fly tipping. So what people will do rather than follow the procedures that the councils put in place for recycling, is they'll take it out to some place like mine in the country and dump it, and the only thing we can do is bury it. So it's a balance, you know. Yeah, sorry, Carolina.
No, I thought you were finished. No, one of the things I think that has been brought up here is systems change, because it seems like the changes would have to, and I'm with you, Jennifer, on this one, that I don't think changing individual behaviors is going to work. Just that's not enough. But it does have to be, it can put some pressure, it can help, but it won't work by itself. But one of the things that I think is missing is the connection between the levels of policymaking and the grassroots. Many times there might be incredible innovations, and there might be these things for big changes you mentioned, Jennifer, and that wouldn't form some changes in the systems. They aren't seen by the people creating policy. And I think this is one of the really big gaps, different levels or scales of action also not talking to each other. Just more dialogue and more connections at a multi-sector level and between the people doing the policy and the people doing the work.
Absolutely. There's a guy that's kind of one of my heroes, is an evolutionary biologist from the United States. His name is David Sloan Wilson. He works a lot with altruism and with cooperation in nature, and he's a fascinating guy. But he has come up with a better metaphor than the ivory tower, right? You're all familiar with the ivory tower, this idea of being in this beautiful ivory building of the whatever psychology department, and you're looking out over at the political science department. So he called it the ivory archipelago, right? So an set of islands. I think that's a really good metaphor, because we all live in these silos, like you were saying, Carolina. That's a huge part of the problem, I think, that we have the regenerative people doing their thing, and it's fantastic. And then you got the design anthropologists, we're doing our thing, and that might be good. And then we got the circular economy people over in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation doing their thing. Actually, I shouldn't accuse them. They're quite cross-disciplinary. But but you know what I mean, right? Everyone speaks a different dialect, like literally. Like we know this from anthropology. In isolated valleys, people start developing dialects because they're not in contact with each other, and all of a sudden it's a different language that the one in the next valley doesn't understand anymore. It's really dangerous. Yeah. And so I agree fully there. We need to communicate on all levels. We need to get rid of this idea of disciplines in university, I think. I like what the D School does over in Stanford. The design school in Stanford. They don't give out degrees, but what they do is they take students from different departments, and then they teach them design thinking, and they give them a certificate. But you're not a design student. So you might be a medical student or a philosophy student or whatever, and they all meet in these cross-disciplinary teams and learn design thinking. I think that's a really good case, a really good example.
Oh, and this is kind of a rogue thought, but we're bringing up schools, and we've been talking about how we should fundamentally change our relationship to nature. And I think one of the things that is being done are forest schools, something that is as simple as just as soon as children are able to be in a school, that they are outside most of the day. That was not my experience. I wish I could have gone to that type of school.
Absolutely.
It's a great idea, and one of the things that we actually do a bit of here we bring in Green Flag, we bring in a lot of education, try to get them out into beach cleans and that kind of thing. I don't have children myself, so I don't actually know how effective it is, but I am working in the social farming space, and this is where when they have children with different needs and are neurodivergent, they actually bring them on to the specific farms so they can get involved in nature. And that's a fantastic thing. Now, it's probably not going to help climate change very much, but it's a fantastic thing to see how they actually develop based on that. So I definitely think there is something that we should be expanding to wider audiences, very much so.
Mhm. Mhm.
Folks, I'm very cognizant of the time, and so perhaps maybe if we could use the last couple minutes to maybe give some closing remarks from your end, some things that you think, your thoughts about the last hour and a half that we've been discussing. And before that, I'll go ahead and close from my end. I'm very appreciative of your time. I think that the conversation from my perspective was very, very valuable, and grateful for your input today. So I wanted to pass that on. Perhaps if we can start with you, Carolina, for your impressions and any last thoughts that you'd like to go ahead and share.
No, I think this I'm really also thank you for the invitation, like, because again, this is one of those conversations that I think this is a very description of what we were just talking about. You're bringing people from different locations, different backgrounds, different disciplines into a conversation around these topics. And I think this is something that really needs to happen. And thank you for the invitation, and everyone else here to just participating, bring all their ideas, all the background, all their knowledge into it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Jennifer?
I was going to echo Carolina. Thank you for the invitation. This has been a really neat discussion. I actually really like talking about this topic of how does our perception of nature influence our work in relation to it, especially sustainability work. I was looking at the invitation, not the invitation, the guest list for the panelist list for the previous one of these, because I think you did two of that. Is that right, Michael?
Correct. Right.
And it probably was just a I would imagine that who ended up in which one was due to just
happenstance.
scheduling. But one thing that I think would be,
and the
Yeah,
conversation
exactly.
was completely different, Jennifer.
yeah, well, I imagine so. And so I think one interesting thing for next time, when I noticed from the other one, was I think having somebody, at least one person on the panel that would, if we're talking about climate anxiety and things like that, that are more directly affected, I think would have been an interesting addition to the conversation. Because I'm noticing in the other one, for example, I would imagine the Kenyan farmer was talking about climate anxiety certainly differently than I talk about it. So I think that'd be a nice addition as well, because I am cognizant of the fact that we are all white presenting people from global north countries. So just something to consider for next time.
Maybe if I can just quickly interject, not only do I agree with you, but the idea, and I know Carolina and I have talked about this one a lot, the idea is to make sure that it's truly equitable and that we have enough representation from the global south. So I couldn't agree with you more. The real problem is coming up with individuals with time. I mean, this is a bad time for a lot of them. The time in the day and the logistics part, but I agree that should be the goal. And maybe I just address that issue very quickly. I think the idea would be to make these conversations as heterogeneous as possible, meaning that we would need to bring in people, and this is a real struggle for me, or is my challenge, which I gladly take on, is to come up with people that might not necessarily have directly different opinions, so diametrically opposed, but to be able to foster a conversation where we would have a pro and contra, and that we can actually look at things from different perspectives. I think that should always be our goal, and we don't have enough of that. And with that, I'll get off my soapbox, and I'm going to hand it over to Michael and let Rebecca have the last word.
So yeah, I would like to also thank you. I can always tell the conversation is good when I'm wired, and I am wired now. So from that barometer, the conversation was very good. I like this kind of lateral thinking. We kind of stepped sideways a lot, touching a lot of different things. How would I wrap it up? I think all of us agree that it requires a systemic change, which needs to be both top down and bottom up at the same time. I personally, how do you say, my shtick or my hobby horse, or I don't know what the expression is I think we need to change the curriculum. I think it needs to be pedagogical. I personally work in university level. I think the curriculum needs to be changed quite radically away from GDP per capita at all costs to something more along the lines of the donut economy. So that takes me to the last part. I think we need to change the story. And I guess it's full circle because I started with that example of science fiction. The stories that we tell, and that's a very human thing, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. And so we need to change the story. And so cultural evolution requires stewardship. I think that's what Carolina said. We can't just let evolution do its thing. Darwin never said that. No one ever said that. Because evolution comes up with some really nasty stuff sometimes. So cultural evolution is a design process. We need to set a goal. We need to prototype a whole bunch of things, monitor outcome, and then replicate the best result. That's evolutionary steps. And I think that starts in the curriculum for me personally, curriculum of schools. And yes, thank you, everyone. Excellent way to spend an hour and a half.
Thanks, Michelle. Rebecca.
Yeah, I don't want to sound bad, but I'm saying I haven't had so much entertainment in a really good and academic way in quite a long time. Generally, you know, if you're lecturing, you as best as you're trying to engage the students, you're telling them. If you go into clients who want to bring in a new sustainability solution, you're telling them. So to actually be able to get involved in a dialogue around it is fantastic, and I'm fascinated by all the different points of view and all the different ways that we're all trying to come to a solution for this massive problem that's confronting us. So I want to say very much so thank you everybody for your time and for sharing so openly what you're thinking, and I know I have a lot to take away with and think about myself.